So COP26, I mean, the focus seems to be about global emissions, and we're talking about fossil fuels mostly, but agriculture doesn't seem to really be on the agenda. Is that frustrating?
Uh, it's frustrating, but I mean, I think that, I mean, there's always this danger, of among progressives, among moderates, among reasonable humans to not indulge in hyperbole, and to be sort of reasonable. And so when I think of like the word frustrating, I don't know if frustrating is the best way to describe my feelings about our leaders' unwillingness to address an issue that's going to destroy the only home we have. Like it's, like I don't want to be, over exaggerate. I don't want to indulge in hyperbole, but the role of animal agriculture and climate change, it's not something we can have an opinion about. I feel like we live in this world where like everyone's so attached to their opinions, and you can have opinions about jazz or a new Taylor Swift record. You can't have opinions about climate catastrophe. Like it's just a simple, overwhelming fact. And I feel like, unfortunately, our leaders and most people haven't figured that out. Like they sort of feel like they can just ignore it. They can say the right things. They can shunt climate change into the realm of opinion without understanding like this is globe destroying phenomena that doesn't care about our opinions. So sorry for my spiel, but frustrating doesn't quite address the enormity of the issue, I think.
So what is the word?
Apocalyptic, existential, I mean, catastrophic existential despair. I mean, it's also hard, as I'm sure you're aware, like everyone wants to focus on the optimistic. You don't want to be too pessimistic. You don't want to be too dark. Like, but what if we're actually, and we are looking at a catastrophe that is going to destroy the only home we have? Like if someone covers you in petrol and sets you on fire, you don't want to be reasonable. You want to put out the fire. You want to scream at the top of your lungs and say, I'm on fire, please put me out. Like you don't want to necessarily say, oh, but if we swap out our light bulbs, everything will be fine. Like what we're confronting is so enormous and so unprecedented. And I guess that's part of the issue, is that and I don't want to get too esoteric or wonky, but like in philosophy, there's the idea of like the is-ought fallacy. And people tend to believe that because something is, it will continue to be, or it ought to be. And because we are emerging from a period of climate stability, everybody assumes that climate stability will continue. But that's kind of like saying, like the moment before a bowling ball gets dropped on your head, you can't say everything's fine because a bowling ball has never dropped on your head head before.
So how do we convey this sense of urgency then? I mean, I'm asking you, I guess in two senses, how do leaders that care convey this, and how do artists as well? What role do they play in trying to convey the sense of urgency?
Honestly, I think the only answer is to say to people, look, we're adults, you're adults. If we don't fix this, we're doomed. Like to not try and put a pleasant face on it, to not try and come up with optimistic, inclusive language, to just simply say, guess what? We're doomed. Unless we fix this in the next minute, we're doomed. And say to people, do you care about your children? Do you care about your family? Do you care about your life? And if the answer is ever yes, we have to fix this. And that means, of course, changing our global energy system. We cannot continue to use oil, gas, petroleum products, and coal. Also, we cannot continue to use animals as food. Like it's, the use of animals for food, the production of meat and dairy, as you know, it's the third leading cause of climate change. And we simply cannot meaningfully address or fix climate change without ending, and I don't mean like moderating or attenuating, ending the use of meat and dairy production. And our leaders have to treat people like grownups and say, look, you can choose to ignore this, but it will kill you. The same way you can choose to ignore that smoking cigarettes will give you lung cancer, but it will kill you. You can choose to ignore COVID, it will kill you. Like there's certain things that people can choose to ignore, the consequences of ignorance being death.
Australia just this week, they've said they won't agree to the 30% methane emissions cuts that a lot of countries, I think the US is looking at, because agriculture is too big an industry. Thoughts on that?
I mean, and I do apologize for if I sound in any way melodramatic. I hope I'm not. I hope I'm actually just sort of trying to let people know that this is not living in the realm of opinion. You know, like, of course, it's important to protect people's jobs, but no one has a job on a planet that doesn't support human life. Like, the fact that they're concerned with some cattle ranchers and some sheep farmers, by all means, these are individuals and they're worthy of our concern, but that's 0.00001% of the human population that we're worried about, at the risk of destroying life for the 99.999% of the rest of us. Like, it's so ridiculous. Like, future generations, if there are future generations, will look back and just simply be like, what were you thinking? Like, the leaders, the people, the corporate leaders, like, just simply, what were you thinking? Like, there was a clear solution and we chose not to take it because of short-term political expediency. You know, I'm working on the assumption there will not be future generations who will be sitting around scratching their heads wondering, but it's just mind-boggling that we know what to do. No one's doing it. Like, there is not a country, there's not a leader, no one's doing it. Everyone's ignoring it in the interest of accommodating voters, in the interest of accommodating industry. The end result is, sadly, and again, trust me, I do not want to say this, the end result is we're doomed. Like, I wish there was a happier way to look at it, but there just isn't.
Is there anything tangible that we can do, that you can foresee, that could happen to arrest the trajectory that we're going down?
That's a great question. And yes and no. From my perspective, at least, like, everyone can do everything they can, which means simply the easiest thing, stop eating meat and dairy. Categorically, across the board, stop eating meat and dairy and let everyone know that meat and dairy production is the third leading cause of climate change. And then do everything in your power to only support politicians who prioritize the climate emergency. You know, it's the only issue that matters, because every other issue is contingent upon dealing with this one. So that's what we can do. But I mean, John Kerry, you know, former senator, presidential candidate John Kerry is an old friend of mine. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but like, the fact that he went to India, China, and Russia and was basically shown the door. You know, this is approximately half of the population of the United States. Then you include Bolsonaro in Brazil, you include what's going on in Australia. The fact that no one is taking this seriously, or at least 50% of the population is absolutely not taking this seriously. I don't know. I mean, again, I'm really trying to sort of put like a more acceptable face on this, but there isn't an acceptable face for the destruction of the only home we have.
I mean no disrespect when I say this, but why should people listen to a musician when it comes to a massive issue like climate change?
I mean, by all means, people shouldn't if they don't want to. I mean, no one's listening to the scientists. No one's listening to the climate activists. So, I mean, I feel like maybe somehow I will, you know, like, if everybody yells at the top of their lungs, maybe at some point people will start listening. Like, I'm not a researcher. I'm not a PhD. I'm simply just repeating what I've read in countless scientific journals. Like everything I'm saying is pretty basic, so I mean, there is always that tendency, like, oh, the public figure, the entertainer, they take themselves too seriously, and they're just, like, the number of times I've been told, like, just shut up and write music. I'm like, yeah, that would be nice if the world wasn't teetering on the edge of catastrophe. So if people are going to continue to ignore scientists and ignore politicians and ignore climate activists, by all means, continue to ignore me, but just don't be too sad in 5 years when the world is uninhabitable.
What role can the arts play then in trying to disseminate really complicated scientific ideas and make them understandable for the general public?
I mean, from my perspective, the main job of public figures is using their audience, communicating like what we're doing right now. It's safe to say, like, if I was working at Cal State as a climate scientist, there's a very good chance we wouldn't be speaking, because there are a lot of climate scientists, and that's not a criticism. I'm just saying that's the world in which we live, is that entertainers command a large audience. And so I think an entertainer's main job is to educate themselves and then present information in a distilled, condensed way that can reach people. I don't know if it's necessarily writing songs about this. I don't know if it's necessarily, I don't know, having interpretive dance pieces. I think it's speaking very clearly and using the platforms that entertainers have.
Are you at a fight or flight sort of emotional level? Is that where you think you may be at the moment?
I think, honestly, are you familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross?
No, but tell me.
Oh, so she wrote this book is on grieving. And she's the one who came up with the idea of like the 5 stages of grief.
Yep.
Bargaining, anger, denial, and then lastly is acceptance. And so sadly, I think I'm in a place of, I'll call it like malignant acceptance, meaning I don't see there's no indication, there's nothing indicating that we are going to fix this problem. And so I sort of wake up every day and I look at the trees and I enjoy my smoothie and I enjoy reading a book and I love drinking a cup of tea outside. And I really just love these things with the understanding it's probably all going to go away. So sadly, I don't think I'm in a place of existential despair. I think I'm in a place of sort of, almost tragic acceptance, because there's not one thing going on the planet that indicates anyone's taking this seriously and that we're going to fix it.
You're expecting to see change in your lifetime?
Oh, within the next 10 years. I mean, it's already started. I live in California, and it's like 10% of California is on fire. And you live in Australia. Australia is battling fires. I mean, like, when we're dealing with it right now, we just sort of collectively assume like, oh, maybe it won't get worse. And I was reading an interview with some climate scientists, and they said, oh, just FYI, in terms of the climate, this year is the best year that we'll have for the next 500,000 years. Like, this is the beginning. It's not going to plateau. Like, there's going to be the catastrophic progression. It's going to be overwhelming.
That hits deep.
I mean, and I do apologize, because like, there are many things in the meantime that you and I and people watching can do to sort of maintain our sanity or maintain our mental health, which is, if you can't fix it right now, there's no point driving yourself insane about the fact that you can't do anything, because we are not, we're not the prime minister of Brazil. We're not Putin. We're not Modi. We're not, we're not the people who actually could do something. So in the meantime, do what you can and hug your family and read your favorite books and drink a cup of tea and just accept that things are impermanent, and unfortunately that impermanence is on an accelerated scale.
Let me just check my notes, but is there anything that you can think of that we haven't covered that we should, that you want to speak to?
I mean, I'm just feeling guilty about being so negative, but I think unfortunately all the data, all the metrics support complete pessimism. And I know that that's not a very helpful, encouraging thing to say, but unfortunately that's the truth. But yeah, so I almost feel like I should probably hang up so you can talk to someone who's a little more optimistic.
I don't know that it's a time for optimism, especially.
It's absolutely not, but at the same time, that's the route that so many people are taking. You know, like there's this idea that we don't want to offend people with the truth. And like, so as a way of analogy, I've been sober for a while. And sometimes when you encounter people who are dealing with addiction in a very catastrophic way, you have to tell them, oh, if you keep doing this, you're going to die. You can't be polite about it. You can't say to them, oh, you know, if you keep shooting up fentanyl 5 times a day, I'm sure it'll work out. You'll be fine. It's like, no, if you keep doing that, you're going to die. You're going to ruin your life and you're going to die. And you have to tell people the truth, because if you don't, it's almost a form of cruelty and disservice. Like if you know a truth and you hide it from someone, and that truth is the only thing that might save their life, it's incumbent upon you to share it with them.
So maybe it's not right to be apologizing. You really are.
But I still, I'm a mealy-mouthed little guy. Like I still feel guilty, but at the same time, you can't sugarcoat apocalypse.
Were they trying?
Yeah.
And Australia, yeah, go on.
Oh yeah, but it's just everybody's trying, and everybody, you know, like, and there are a lot of very well-intentioned, wonderful people really trying to address this issue in a palatable way. But like I said, like when you're talking to someone who is destroying themselves, politeness and palatability should not be the criteria you apply to when you're discussing this information.
Just to finish with, can you maybe give us anyone watching who's feeling stressed as a result of this, can you maybe give some advice for dealing with climate stress or climate anxiety?
Yeah, I mean that's so profoundly important. You know, because it sort of goes back to the serenity prayer in 12-step programs. It's like, you know, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And largely what's going on with the global climate, it's outside of our ability to change it. Like we can do our best, but there's no point losing sleep over it. There's no point being miserable and depressed if we can't do anything. So that's why I have to almost like make this concerted effort to find things that bring me happiness. And that's what I suggest to other people is, you know, find the things that you love and hold on to them and enjoy them, with the understanding that, you know, like all things are impermanent. And as I said, unfortunately, the progress towards impermanence is on a very accelerated pace.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It's been.
Oh yeah, sorry for being so negative, but unfortunately, like I said, all the data supports that pessimism.